Hollowmen form?
All right. Well, I actually had to touch base with some of the other guys to get the cobwebs out of my head on that. But we formed in the band formed in winter 1984, so only 36 years ago today. We were all living in Des Moines, Iowa at the time. Tom, and I'll go through the members, but at that point we were all in Des Moines, Iowa. The origin story for the Hollowmen begins with a band called The Chant, which was kind of a post-punk synth pop band that Mike Sangster was in, and along with some other folks. And I joined the band toward the tail end of that band's tenure. And The Chant broke up in the fall of 1984. And The Chant was this kind of schizophrenic band where it was like post-punk synth pop, but a big dose of reggae as well. I don't know what, it held together somehow, but half the band became a reggae band called Curious George. And Mike and I went our separate way and formed what became the Hollowmen, with more of an emphasis on garage rock, pop. Anything but reggae, I guess, is kind of where we started. So for a couple weeks or maybe a month or so, Mike and I were just kicking about ourselves, just the two of us. Mike was the better guitar player, so what do you know? I played bass instead. We kind of worked up some songs, but then of course we had the plot to figure out, okay, who else we're going to get to join this band. So the first person we endeavored to bring on was Tom Armstrong. Tom was going to Drake University. He hails from Springfield, Illinois. And he was like the new guy in town, the guitar slinger. He played in a couple bands, just awesome guitarist, looked totally cool on stage. Mike and I knew, my guy, somehow we got to get this guy to play with us. So we had to kind of woo and seduce Tom with a couple conversations to convince him to come hang out with us. He was in a couple other bands at the time, a band called Smile Core, another band, I think it was called LBTD, the first initials of all the members. But Tom decided to hang out with Mike and I and see where we could go. And then the final piece was the drummer. And we opted to go with Joe Page and bring him into the band. What was amazing is that Tom and Mike and I were at that point 20 years old. Joe was only 15. In fact, I think he only just turned 15. And so he was in 10th grade, and all the rest of us were basically, freshmen, sophomore in college. And so that created kind of an interesting dynamic, to say the least. I felt like we were almost Joe's big brothers at some level, if he'd be willing to say yes to that. But we played our first shows together in the middle of December. And this was only after being together for probably a couple of weeks. It only took us a couple of weeks to work up about 15 or so songs so that we could play a 45-minute set. And so from mid to late December 1984, we were off like a rocket.
So thinking about that first set, what songs might you have included? Do we know any of those? Maybe start off with just by asking how and when did the Hollowmen form? What's the backstory?
Well, yeah, it would have been the winter of 84, 85 when we first got going. The backstory on that was the previous spring of 84. Mike Sangster and I played together in a band and called the Smile Core. I think we had one or two gigs, and neither one of us was the front man in that band. I played guitar, and Mike played a monophonic synth, and basically functioned like the bass player in the band. He would play these driving D kind of bass lines on a monophonic synth. And that band fizzled out. I left for the summer. Went back to Illinois for the summer. And while I was gone, pretty much as soon as I left, Mike met Eric Svensson. Mike Sangster met Eric Svensson, and they formed a band called The Chant. That band went going over the summer while I was gone. I came back at the end of the summer, and I picked back up with the Smile Core guy and sort of restarted that band with a different rhythm section. And then that band did one gig, and I realized it wasn't for me. It wasn't something I wanted to do, so I left. The chant had fizzled out. Like the chants rhythm section had left to start a reggae band. So I think it was at a party and I was talking to Mike. I don't know if I'd even met Eric yet. And Mike was talking to me about playing with him and Eric. And I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. And I wasn't 100% sold on it at first because I don't know, I didn't even know Eric, and Mike had only been playing guitar for a couple of months. So I wasn't sure what they had in mind. Their idea was kind of more like a garage rock band, like kind of like the Flesh Tones were big at the time. The Liars, the Neats, there was kind of this garage rock revival going on. So that was a lot of the original idea. So I got together with those guys and we started writing songs together right away. So that would have been the winter of '84. And then one thing the song that's on Poison for Profit that I distinctly remember like really sold me on playing with those guys was First Mistake, which I wrote on my own and I brought it to the band. And I didn't really have an idea for an arrangement at all. I just kind of had this, I had my parts on the song, but it was very nebulous. And I threw it out to the band and it just happened like magic. Like Eric started playing that double stop bass part and Joe started rolling in with the thing on the tom-toms, the floor tom, and the little accent. And then Mike just started playing that repetitive arpeggio. And just like that, like, first time through, this bare bones skeletal thing that I brought, like, had this arrangement that I never would have conceived of on my own, or like that just sort of emerged from the four of us playing together. And I think that was the moment where I was like, oh yeah, I want to stick this, we've got some kind of combination here that I've never had with other musicians that I've played with. Not that I was very experienced at that point, but it was like, wow, this is magic. That just happened like magic. So this is for me.
What is the
release and specifically? But we'll first start out just by asking a little bit about how and when did the Hollowmen form?
It's best I can tell, and the only reason I know this is because the Poison for Profit cassette came out in 1985. So we started in 1984, and we came out of another band that Eric Svensson and I had been playing in. And I don't even really specifically remember the conversation, but just the sense of things is that Eric and I kind of wanted to do something that was more guitar driven. The band that we were playing in at the time, the Chant, had synthesizers, and I think at one point Chris Kenline was playing congas in the group, and it was a fun band. It was a great group of guys to play with, but Eric and I had different aspirations, and so he and I would get together and kind of work on some material on the side, if you will. And I had also played with Tom in a group called Smile Core. And we didn't play for long. It was a very short-lived project. And it was kind of one of these things where we were like, hey, let's do this. It'll be fun. And then after Eric and I got together, we tried to find some drummers to play with. And Rick Mank was one of the drummers that we tried out. And as I best recall it, Rick was kind of connected with other people in the music scene and probably pointed us in the direction of Joe Page, because Rick ultimately was going to be leaving Drake University. Rick, to give you a little backstory, a number of the people that were in the Des Moines music scene were Drake students. And Tom was one of those people, and Rick was one of those people. And just kind of out of that pot of that kettle, if you will, of people and interacting and playing together, we started playing more with Tom. We started playing together with Joe. And I guess we came up with a band. And I don't know. I mean, I don't have any specific memories where it's like we put a flag in the sand and we're like, yes, we're a band. We just kind of came together and we did what we did.
So I haven't specifically asked the other members this question, but it's been on my mind. How did you come up with your name?
Ultimately, it started with an exchange between Eric and I threw out the name Straw Dogs, the Sam Peckinpah film. I just thought Straw Dogs sounded kind of cool. And somehow in that conversation, Eric was like, well, that reminds me of this T.S. Eliot poem, The Hollowmen. And ultimately, then we were like, that's pretty cool. Maybe we should go with that. I mean, that's a very simplified version of it, but